is now time to turn to the Thames Torso Murders, all of them, but this is just an introduction, a taster if you will. River Thames, a very clean river now, 125 species of fish are supposed to live in that stretch of the river there now. It's a picturesque addition to the London skyline, looking very tranquil with a glassy surface reflecting the lights. A pleasure ground for tourists who go on boat trips up and down it. Very different to how it was in 1888. Back in the late Victorian period there were docks all along the river, working docks. London was the busiest port in the world. We had St Catherine's Dock, London Dock here, Shadwell Basin, Limehouse Basin, Millwall Dock and the West India Docks, further down the Royal Docks, and on the other side the Surrey Docks. And not only that, these buildings here, a lot of the ships moored up and offloaded straight into warehouses on the riverside. It was a very busy river, very congested, very dirty, full of traffic, full of hubbub, full of human activity. Tower Bridge, that iconic symbol of London, was being built between 1886 and 1894 during the key period of some of these torso murders, and that would have restricted flows down the river while all that building work was going on, from beyond the bridge to this side of the bridge. It's also important to realise that not only was the river congested with ships during this period, very congested, but there still is a 20-foot, at least a 20-foot tidal flow between low and high tide. It's a very high tidal flow. Now we have Wapping here. Inland is Stepney and Whitechapel, and just beyond that we've got Bethnal Green and Spillfields. The Jack the Ripper's hunting ground is just beyond the river, and the docks dominated trade and business and employment for all of the East End. Give you a bit of background on the Torso Murders. In the late 19th century, over a few decades, there are a series of bodies and body parts found in the River Thames and nearby that are collectively known as the Thames Torso Murders, roughly concurrently at the same time as the Jack the Ripper murders. Now, if you're going to reinvestigate the Jack the Ripper murders, it makes sense to take into account the Thames Torso Murders to see if there's a possibility that they might be by the same hand. And that is what this investigation is going to do. Later I'll go through every single one of those Thames Torso murders in great detail, but at the moment, as I said, this is just an overview. So what are the similarities? Well, it's in the same general area, London obviously, roughly the same time frame. There are some that have got a very close crossover, which I will mention shortly. Crossover with the Jack the Ripper murders. Probably the same type of victim, probably prostitutes. There's a similarity, it seems, in the way some of the cuts were made on the bodies, some of the Jack the Ripper murders. There seems to be the case that body parts were missing with the torsos, and of course there are differences. They weren't clearly a result of a blitz attack, but that could be explained by other factors. Given the rarity of serial killers, particularly in that period, there has to be a very good chance that the same hand was involved. And a key case to understanding this is the Golden State Killer in the United States, a case that came to light only in the last few years. So I've repaired back to the office and selected a number of maps to help go through the rest of the case, this introductory case about the Torso Murders. But I just mentioned the Golden State Killer. That is a very significant case that teaches us not to discount the possibility that multiple seemingly different crimes might be the work of one person. The Golden State Killer, his real name is Joseph D'Angelo, and he committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes and 100 burglaries in California between 1973 and 1986, quite a long period, in at least 3 very different sprees in different areas of California with very different behaviours. These distinct crimes led to the then uncaught criminal being given different names, such as the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker, and another one, there's several more as well, but another one, the Diamond Knot Killer. By comparison, linking the Ripper murders to the Thames Torso murders seems very minor. D'Angelo, interestingly enough, D'Angelo stopped and was found many years later in 2018, many years after he stopped committing these crimes, through genetic genealogy. Some of his relatives had given their DNA samples to an ancestry type website to link families, and they ran DNA that they still had from the original crimes, cold case, through that same database, and found a connection to D'Angelo through his relatives who had gone onto this genetic research website to find out their family links. He's pleaded guilty, but hasn't yet, as of now, at this precise moment, he hasn't been sentenced. It's another interesting thing. At the time of his arrest, he was living quietly with one of his daughters and a granddaughter. As I say, he stopped and he went on living quietly, holding down a normal job with his family. So it's quite an interesting case. He confounds a lot of these myths and preconceptions that people have about serial killer behaviour. Now I'm going to talk very briefly about suspects. Now, most suspects, that Ripper suspects, can't be made to fit as the Thames Torso murderer. They've got no plausible location in which to commit the crime. They'd have to dismember the body. They'd have to have a private, secure location in which to do it. They'd have no logical means of transporting the body parts. Most of the suspects would have probably been either dead or arrested or out the country or too young at the time of some of the murders. And this, I think, explains why most Ripperologists won't entertain the idea that the Thames Torso murderer and Jack Ripper might be the same person, because they're invested in a particular suspect who couldn't really plausibly, or possibly totally impossible for that suspect to have done any of these torso crimes. Now, strangely enough, Lechmere can be made to fit them. But we'll come on to that on another occasion, really. Now I'm going to go through, in brief detail, the Torso murders. As I say, I'm going to come back to each one individually in future episodes. Now, the first I'm going to discuss is the so-called Rainham Mystery, where body parts were found between May and June 1887. Now, the first part was found in Rainham, in Essex. This is Rainham here. Is that in focus? Can you see that? But the body part, the bit of the torso, was found on the river just down here. Now the next part, interestingly, if we pan away, was found on Temple Pier, which is in the City of London, around here. Around here, on the river. The next part was found in Battersea Park, near Battersea, over here. And then the last part in Regent's Canal in Kentish Town, up here, quite far inland in fact. So they were found, these body parts were found between Rainham, Battersea, Temple and Kentish Town. Quite a diverse area. As I said, the Tower Bridge was being built at this time, making this area a bit of a blockage. So how did the part float all the way down to Rainham? It suggests to me it was dropped off past Tower Bridge, the Tower Bridge construction, to float down there. Seemingly there was also organ removal involved in the Rainham Mystery. Now the next torso case is known as the Whitehall Mystery, and the body parts were found in September and October 1888. Now this is in the middle of the Jack the Ripper murders, and this is one of the other cases which is I alluded to earlier that has to be connected to the Jack the Ripper murders, if only because it happened literally in the middle of it. The body parts were found into October, but almost certainly the victim, who was never identified, like the Rainham one was never identified, almost certainly was killed around the sort of time, probably shortly after Annie Chapman had been murdered. So it's very closely connected in time to the Jack the Ripper murders. Now, if we look at the map, this is Temple Pier, where one of the parts of the Rainham Mystery murder was found. Come round the river to where Scotland Yard was being built at the time, and that is where the greater part, the largest part of the torso of the Whitehall Mystery was found. They were building Scotland Yard. It was found in the foundations, very eaten by maggots, and shortly after they searched the site again with a sniffer dog, and found a leg very close to where the first part was found. Now, actually, prior to the discovery of this torso in the foundations of the Scotland Yard building that was being built at the time, as I said, they actually found an arm and shoulder floating in the river much further down in off Pimlico down here. But it wasn't immediately thought that it was thought initially that it was a prank, but it was actually part of the same torso that was at in the Whitehall Mystery. So anyway, that's a very interesting case because, as I said, there has to be a bit of a crossover with the Jack the Ripper murders. The next case is that of Elizabeth Jackson in June 1889, and it's very unusual in these cases of the torsos in that we know the name of the victim, Elizabeth Jackson. Now, the body parts of the parts of the body of the victim, Elizabeth Jackson, were found over a very wide area, lots of different parts. The first part was found near Battersea, over here. The next part by Horsley Down, opposite the tower, here. Parts are found in Limehouse, actually further down the river than this, slightly further down. Other parts by Chelsea Embankment and by Battersea and Nine Elms. A very wide area, and there was quite probably organ removal involved, and it was the way the body had been cut up was very similar to the method used in the Rainham Mystery and the Whitehall Mystery. We never found the heads of these. They never found the heads of any of these torsos, by the way. The heads were always missing completely. So the Elizabeth Jackson case is very interesting for that reason, and for the wide area. And again, this is where Tower Bridge was being built. We had one part just found just by Tower Bridge, one part way down by Limehouse. So it's the bit that was found by Tower Bridge suggests to me that it couldn't get past Tower Bridge, and that's why it was washed up there. That's what I probably suspect happened in that case. The fourth case is the Pinchin Street Torso, September 1889. Now, I've covered this case already in reasonable detail. I did a short film all about it, and it was included in part 5 of Lechmere and the Whitechapel murders, because it was included, Pinchin Street Torso file was included in the Whitechapel murder files by Scotland Yard. Clearly there's an interrelation between the Pinchin Street Torso case and the Whitechapel murders. This is where Pinchin Street Torso is found, in this area here. This, where my hand is where the Jack the Ripper murders took place, within that area under my hand, pretty much. Now, we can see the River Thames, how close it is to the Pinchin Street Torso. We have the Limehouse part down here. We have Horsley down here. We've got Temple Pier here. We've got Scotland Yard, where the Whitehall Mystery was found, is there. We've got Pimlico. We've got Nine Elms. We've got Battersea. That shows the context of the Thames Torso Murders to the Jack the Ripper murders. Now, of these 4 cases that I've discussed so far, there's the Rainham case, the Whitehall Mystery, Elizabeth Jackson case, and the Pinchin Street Torso. Dr. Hebbert, Scotland Yard medical doctor, did a study of these cases, and he felt that the method of amputation was very similar in all of them. Now, and that being the case, that it was likely that the same hand was involved, and that the feeling was that it's probably not a doctor, but someone who's used to amputating limbs, possibly a knacker, or someone to do with the butchering of animals rather than a medical man specifically. Now, because these cases are linked, logically, if we can find a good suspect for one of them, then it's got to be a good suspect for all of them. That's just the way it works. But before we go into that, there were other cases as well, which I will discuss. We're going to jump back in time to 1873, 14 years roughly before the Rainham Mystery, and this particular torso is called the Battersea Mystery because the first parts were found by Battersea Park here. Now I've got a larger scale map here because the body parts for this torso were quite widely found. So quite a few parts are found in the Battersea Nine Elms area. A face, unusually the face was found, but not the skull underneath the face. It was just the flesh, like it had been scalped or taken off the skull, was found in the Limehouse area. Another body part was found on the shore, pretty much where the Millennium Dome is now, on the south bank. Another part on the south bank by Woolwich, floating down there. There's quite a wide area here between Battersea and Woolwich. At that time, the Tower Bridge thing wasn't relevant because it wasn't being built then, but that was the pool of London here was a very congested part of the river. So again, the fact that these parts washed up further down does probably suggest there was a whole series of parts of the Battersea Mystery found in this area and a few parts down this area. Again, it suggests 2 different dumping grounds for the body parts, I would suggest. There was another torso in the river the next year in 1874, but very little is known about this case, and that's called the Putney case, and that was just in this area here, a little bit further down river or upriver in Putney. Now, I'll look into these cases again in future episodes, but the method of dissecting the bodies, well, in particular in the Battersea case, was very interesting and needs to be commented on and discussed in detail. Now we're going to jump back forward to another 10 years to 1884, where the case is the Tottenham Court Road Mystery, it's known as. In October 1884, some body parts were found in a little side turning opposite Good Street Station here, and a few weeks later in Bedford Square here, other parts are found. Now there is some confusion as whether this is one case or one torso or 2 torsos, but if you pardon the expression, I'll dissect it and go through that in greater detail in a separate episode. Now if we come back onto the map, there was a series of other murders, loosely can be called the Bloomsbury murders, that took place in the same area as this torso in roughly the same time scale in the mid to late 1870s into the 1880s, which again we'll talk about that in the context of that in a future episode. Now there's one last torso, so we've had the 4 that are grouped together: Rainham, the Whitehall Mystery, the Elizabeth Jackson case, the Pinchin Street Torso, the 2 earlier ones, the Battersea Mystery and the Putney case. Then we've had the Tottenham Court Road, that brings up 7/8 if the Bedford square one is a separate case. And then the last case I'm going to discuss is in 1902, quite a lot later than the rest, in a place called Salamanca Place, south of the river here, just inland, just off the river, very close to the river. A series of body parts were found, piled up. The skull was included in it, unusually. They were sort of in a pile of bits, 10 bits. Some of the parts had been seemingly boiled and even roasted, so it has a different feel to it than the other torso cases. But there are some of those factors are themselves interesting, which I will discuss in due course. But it was, if we come back on the map, it was similar location. It was here where it was found. You've got Whitehall Mystery here, we've got Pimlico Shore, we've got Nine Elms, we've got Battersea. So it's in that same sort of area, strangely, isn't it? It wasn't found over here or up here or over here. It always seems to be in the same location. Even if it wasn't in the river, it was close to the river. So we'll go back over this again, as I say, in a future episode. So as I said, we'll be going through all these cases in greater detail and looking at the possible connections between Charles Lechmere and where there are connections. We're not necessarily strong connections in every single case. Now, for those who are interested, in this series we're going to be discussing 25 different unsolved murders between 1873 and 1902. I've gone through quite a few in the Whitechapel series, quite a few in 8 here in this little series here. We'll be examining them all properly, and other matters that aren't directly related to the murders but are related to the case in general. So 25 murders in central London and the East End. The canonical 5, the generally accepted Jack the Ripper murders, will be seen as just a phase in the middle of a much longer sequence. The Thames Torso murders are, I would suggest, part of this sequence, stretching from the beginning to the end of a whole potentially 29-year long murder spree. It's not really a spree, is it, actually? A 29-year span. So stay tuned in, look out for future episodes, and I'll take you to some rarely visited crime scenes. Thank you very much. Anyway, thank you for watching. Keep looking out for new videos from the House of Lechmere, and please subscribe. Thank you.